For years, the cyber playbook was simple. Connect everything, integrate everything, and keep the data flowing at all costs. But what happens when that very strategy becomes the biggest source of risk? Well, today's conversation will challenge one of the longest standing assumptions in enterprise IT and ask whether resilience this year will depend on knowing when to disconnect just as intelligently as how we connect. Well, joining me today is Steven Brodie, and he's from the NATO-backed Goldilock Secure, a company that's rethinking blast radius, operational continuity, and what real control looks like in this hyper-connected world that we all find ourselves. So if you care about protecting crown jewel assets, buying time during an attack, and moving beyond compliance checklists towards the cybersecurity utopia of true containment, this episode will hopefully give you a completely different lens on the future of cybersecurity. But enough scene setting from me. Let me officially introduce you to my guest right now. So thank you for joining me on the podcast today. Can you tell everyone listening a little about who you are and what you do?
Well, thank you for hosting us. It's an absolute pleasure. My name is Steve Brodie. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Goldilock. We are a cybersecurity company, hence by its name. Yeah, that does something very unique in the industry, and I'm sure your listeners are going to be very excited to learn a lot more about this.
Yeah, there's so much we're going to get through today. And I think for the past 20 years, the industry mantra has been, hey, let's connect to everything. And we're now reaching the point where overconnectivity has also almost become a strategic liability for business. Is that what you're seeing at the moment? We've both come from a time where we had to bring your own devices, then we had shadow IT. But what are you seeing here? Where are we now?
I completely understand where that comment is coming from. So again, I'm part of the group that started to push that mantra 20 odd years ago with about connect everything as quick as possible, as fast as possible, and everywhere as possible, because it was about driving business. Yeah, and it was about driving the way to connect to give a competitive advantage. However, as years have gone by, we have many connections out there. Some that are forgotten, some that are old. We're connecting everything, sometimes for no reason at all. So we have a situation where we are hyper connected. In a lot of places, we're over connected, which means that we're sadly leaving a lot of exposures open into sort of a lot of organizations, which means there's risks. And then you see this now in all the cyber attack announcements. You see the IBM report that got released the other day. The risks for organizations keep getting greater and greater and greater. And a lot of that is through connections. Yeah, it's the remote connections that come in, and that's how we have to make sure that we have to change the mantra and the philosophy that organizations take to go from always connected to always connected when required. And that's an important difference.
It really is. And before you joined me on the podcast today, I was doing a little research on you, and I was also looking at the slightly tweaked mantra, because you spoke about, I think it's right-sized connectivity. So what does that look like in practice for a modern enterprise that still depends on cloud services, APIs, and remote access, etc.? What's right-sized connectivity look like?
So you have to first of all start from what's the objective of an organization. Yeah, most organizations are not there to be a IT company. They're not there to be a security company. So what they have to do is they have to look at what their business risks are. What is the most important things for them? So therefore they have to get clarity of where they have connections. They have to look at control of those connections, and therefore work out when do you access something and when do you not access something. So it's not about saying you don't have connections available, as I mentioned just a moment ago. It's about having the connections to be available when required. So it does mean that as people start to look at their risk registers, do you need your crypto keys always online? Yeah. Do you need your HR records always accessible 24 hours, 7 days a week? Do you need sort of like your systems to always be connected from the finance to the operations team? No, but you need to be in control of them. And that's what we're trying to get people to think about on the right size connectivity piece. Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of security products out there, and they are needed and they're wonderful, and we're not going to sort of ever say anything bad against them. But there are always incidents that are occurring. So the security market hasn't got everything right yet. What we bring is an extra layer of security at the physical aspect to ensure that instead of having just logical control of your connectivities, you now have physical control of your connections as well. And that adds a whole new depth of actually defense that's never been available before from both a reactive and a proactive stance.
And a question I've got to ask is, when we're scrolling down our news feeds and we see a typical breach that happens today, why does that blast radius still tend to be so large? And how much of that is driven by architectural decisions, maybe even technical debt that made in the name of convenience or speed and another lifetime ago, where many of those people working for the company are no longer there? Why is that radius so big still?
Well, if you think about it, and we've spoken to a lot of different people, as you can imagine, from board advisors to the military to finance organizations to others, and they talk about it as, again, risk management at the end of the day. And most organizations have grown, and a lot of them grow organically. So you add another connection, you add another system, and sometimes the rate of those growths has meant that they've gone through it at such a pace that they haven't been able to refresh their systems. They haven't been able to work out how that acquisition has been able to merge all the different systems together correctly to give them the full parameters of control. So when you start to see the way that modern attacks work, it's typically done by software. Yeah. So it's a software part that goes from A to B. Have you always got your systems patched? Yeah. Have they always been updated? Are they even available to be patched nowadays? Certainly when you look at some of the CNI aspects. So it's also a case of, when you go through an attack, you can get one small breach and you think, oh, we've contained it. But if you've only got that software and they've got something dormant and then release it later, it can just spread like wildfire. So you need to have that segmentation controls in place to physically stop it spreading, not just logically, because otherwise there's a software part that comes through. And if you think about what's happening with all of the sort of like the news last week, unfortunately, to one of the firewall vendors, with the AI tools that are coming out, yeah, they're speeding up the automation and the ability for the adversaries to go through and attack different systems. So what this means is the bad guys only need to be quicker than you can patch as an organization. And patching takes time, it takes effort, it takes people to be able to do it and systems to be able to do it. And how do you buy yourself time as an organization? If you haven't got that in a physical control like ours, then at the end of the day, you are in an arms race. And software, we see what happens all over the place. And that's the reason why we often get the commentary that the blast radius keeps expanding. Yeah. And in some cases, they're quick to react. Yeah. Some cases, when we've seen it in the press with some organizations where they've actually run down and pulled the cable because that was the only option they had. So it's a debate that a lot of people will have about how do we sort of control a zone, how do we control a segment? And that's why I often use that word segmentation. Yeah, and at the physical layer, that's how you do the blast radius control.
I think you hit the nail on the head there with that word time. I mean, even if you've got the perfect strategy and you've got the time to do all that patching, getting downtime for some of those critical applications from stakeholders, that's a challenge on its own, isn't it, half the time?
It is. It's a massive challenge. And that's also why we see sometimes the people misunderstanding where they're secure. They've gone and got compliancy, but they haven't got security. The two aren't always hand in hand. So exactly as you point out, that time is fundamental. And what we provide as the Fibrate product is not just a reactive tool to say, we pull up a barrier and we stop the breach from spreading and going further. We change the whole perspective of the way that you look at operational resilience and security and risk by saying, actually, do we need it connected? If we don't, why connect it? Yeah. And then we connect and open the door at the right time for the right person to do the right job and then shut that again. And going back to that sort of example about the AI beating the sort of like the patches, that's just that's a maintenance issue as well. Yeah. So as you said, it's a time window that people have to have. You have to book in sort of a time to say, right, we're going to shut that system down, or shut access to that system down, more importantly. And that just exacerbates when you start to look at day zero type attacks. Yet when a day zero issue is found, how long is it before then the vendor can actually put out the software patch? And then you have to get the right person to go and do the installations. And again, depending on the size and scale of the company, can you actually have an IT expert immediately online to do the updates and patch rollouts? The answer is 9 out of 10 times you don't. Yeah, you have to prioritize your resources appropriately. So we're trying to give people the choice of how do they assess what they can afford to lose or how much loss they can take.
And logical micro-segmentation, that's something that many people listening would have widely adopted as a control. But even there, I mean, where does that fall short? And where do you believe software-based controls alone are just no longer enough?
And well, I just repeat what I said earlier. It's software on software. Yeah, it's purely software on software. And eventually the bad guys will get through. It's just then again, how do you control that? And don't forget, I think the whole micro-segmentation software element is absolutely vital because it starts to put things into a practice and process that people understand. It's a tool set that people use, but it's only a part of the puzzle. You need to look at the entire picture, the entire puzzle to actually go through and actually say, right, we now have the hardware protected, and the software protected. So again, as you go through that, I would ask you, why would you only look at a micro-segmentation like software strategy when you're looking at an entire solution? Because at the end of the day, as I said, most people are not IT companies. They're not sort of security companies. They are trying to sort of provide clean water. They're trying to ensure banking services are provided, healthcare, all of those other aspects. So you're only looking at half of your defensive solution here. So it's about, as I said, building the entire stack together.
So at Goldilock Secure, you focus on physical segmentation that can remotely connect or disconnect assets without sending commands over the internet. So how does that change the threat model compared to, let's say, the traditional network defenses that many people listening will have?
So if I take us on a trip back through history where we started as well, when we was building the internet out, originally before Cisco became so dominant and so wonderful in what they did, you would have people that would actually have networks that were control networks and data networks, and they were over 2 cables. And Cisco got such an advantage when they actually managed to put the control and the data network all over the one cable, which then allowed us to have the hyperconnectivity and the scale and the great things that we've got today with all the technology. What then happened is, though, you then saw the security industry boom because they realized there was security challenges. What we've in effect done with our technology is basically be able to split the control plane and the logical plane back out again, but over one cable. So you now have the physical control, and you can choose that whether it's human in the middle, and you can go over sort of a SMS, for example. You can send a text message to say, allow the access to flow or shut off the access. Or you can have it via an API, so you can automatically link it to your SOC, your SIEM, your management tools. So you can then put policies and processes in place to give you that sort of control factor, that control elements to say, right, this zone is only allowed to be opened at this time of day, or this zone is only allowed to be opened if sort of certain individuals have the right criteria, or actually we've seen something suspicious, therefore we go and actually hit the alert threshold and shut that system off. So you provide that layer of physical control that comes through and actually gives you that boundary that never been seen before.
And we will have a lot of IT and security professionals listening today, but also stakeholders, business leaders, etc. And one of the reasons I wanted to highlight that is I think there's always been somewhat of a tension between security and operational continuity. So how do you introduce deliberate fire breaks into a network without slowing the business down or frustrating teams who rely on seamless access and almost see it as a hindrance to their working day when you're trying to be the guardians of the network?
Absolutely. So there's different ways to answer that. So for those that actually would be looking at the architecture and the sort of the physical installation is actually very, very easy. It's more about 2 cables being moved around to put it in line with the system. So it's a very simple installation process. The process of policy and decision-making authority, that's where it takes a little bit more understanding of how to do this, because yes, there's always the debate. We need more networking, we need more security, we need more of the other IT aspects, and how do you get together? The reality is it gets set by the board. If you think of the people responsible for the company, they have a duty to actually ensure that their shareholders are supported correctly. They have a duty to their customers to make sure their products are done right. You have the duty to then make sure that your systems are operating as quickly as you can. So we're not in any shape or form trying to insert a product that is a hindrance for anybody. It's supposed to be a help. And it allows those boundaries and those controls to become in place for people to say, yes, we continue to operate as normal, but if we need to press the access control, we're now in control. And we only give people that access who need it, when they need it, and why. You also then have the ability then to say, we have an audit trail. So if you start to look at compliancy, you start to look at all those other things that are coming through, like NIST, for example. When you do have the NIST policy being followed, the first thing you should be doing is isolate and then investigate and then remedy. We do that in a physical tool, so you can start to look at compliancy reasons, but also then you have an audit trail to say, actually, who has access? We have one customer that I'll talk about as an example here. They have masses of systems deployed all over the place, and they have a lot of third-party contractors, and they've always been able to set them up with your VPN credentials, your login credentials, all of the IT type of stuff. But the problem they had was that they wouldn't always know when their time had shut down, so they couldn't sort of ensure that they never had access. With this system, you can give them all the VPN, the passwords, all the rest of their logins. But if you've actually then physically disconnected them from their access, they'll never get to the system to even try to log in. So it actually buys people the time and the security and the knowledge and the confidence, that they will actually sort of like know that who is in the system, when they're in the system at the right time. So it's actually a tool that actually we've seen actually provide a lot of collaboration between those other parties to work out, right, yes, we do need this IT zone to connect to this OT zone, but the technologies are different. So we need to come in for 1 day a week for an audit period or 5 minutes a day. Whatever it happens to be, you set the parameters, they're in control. We're not going to dictate to them how they do it, but it's a case of bringing them together for a common objective.
And I think a very real problem inside every organisation is that rising amount of technical debt that they've built up. And at the same time, there's pressure to add AI, add agentic AI, hundreds, thousands maybe of agents into the mix as well. So for CISOs listening who are beginning to reassess their architecture, what are the first indicators that their current network design has grown far beyond what is defensible right now?
Just look at the amount of alerts that are coming through to the SOC. It's you'll see that. Just read the press. You'll see all those different announcements that are coming through. And I did mention earlier, just if you look at what the AI has to do, they just have to be quicker than the patching capability.
Yeah.
So how do you get patches out there faster, quicker? You can't. So the way that I sometimes positioned us, certainly in the partnerships that we're forming with the firewall vendors, is we're the guardians of the guardians. So we're there to protect them. So when that software firewall hasn't got the ability to be patched, you can now go back to the buying time scenario. You can actually pull up the barriers, and ensure that system isn't accessible without your oversight. So if you do need it to be accessed, of course, you can then allow the access to be there. You can watch it as the security engineer that under the CISO policies. You can see what's happening, and then you can again pull the barriers up until you've had the time to patch and go through. So it's another option. It's another option that we believe is going to be the only way to actually be so quick and responsive at the physical layer to give you control when the world is software and software attacks.
And if we go back, 5 to 10 years ago, the C-suite was often accused of not understanding the real value of cybersecurity. I think that has largely changed now, but many boards still measure cybersecurity maturity through things like compliance checklists. So how should leader teams rethink metrics if containment and resilience are ultimately becoming the primary goal now?
Well, it comes down to different viewpoints, and different boards will have different ways of assessing this. Some will be about of how much loss are we willing to take, because they will take loss. Some will be actually how many incidents are we taking. Some will take it in terms of actually more of a technical approach to say how many engineers have we got dealing with actually reactive scenarios of operational uptime compared to productivity. So there's other ways to think of that. What we are actually seeing as part of the education processes with this as well, it's actually a very easy conversation for the board to understand. It's without needing a PhD, like some of the sort of like the AI tools that you want to be able to explain how and why it gives you all the value. We can basically say door open or door shut. So if you think about it in a nice, easy way, when you live at home, most people will shut their front door. Most people will lock their front door. They choose when they open it and they go to work, or when they go to the gym or to see their friends, and they will maybe give a key to one of their neighbours to allow themselves to come in at certain times. That's what we provide, but we do one step a little bit further than that, but we actually hide where the front door is. So people don't even know where the front door is. So you can't just walk past the street and then look inside and see whatever your crown jewels are as an organisation. So the board with this tool now give themselves one, a compliance audit boost. Yeah. So they know that they've got a tool that is the action of what those compliancy rules are trying to do. They know they've got an extra level of security. And they also know that now that they have the ability to really defend themselves as required.
I always try and give everyone listening a valuable takeaway. So if the future of cybersecurity really is about controlled disconnection rather than constant connectivity, what is the mindset shift required in an organization, and especially from tech leaders who've spent their careers expanding into integration there, and they've got a certain way of working and they've been following in certain instructions for a decade? What mindset shift and cultural shift needs to change now?
Well, there's a few things on that. First of all, it's not just about controlled disconnection, it's about controlled connection as well. It's important to make sure we're not turning things off. So if you're a water purification system, for example, we want people to still have clean water. We just don't want to change the chemical constructs like for anybody to do that. So it's important to do that. The other part that I would say, it's all about standard change management. Don't think doing the same things that you've always done is going to change the perspective. So you have to be able to look at the new modern techniques. You have to look at the new modern ways of thinking. In many ways, we're not a modern technique. There's air gap networks that have been around for many, many years. What we've done is applied modern techniques of how to use air gap technology in a system to give you full control. So we now give you all the software flexibility that organizations are used to, but at the physical layer. So it combines this strength. So the part for me that becomes really important for people is understand where your risks are and actually give them authority and control, and decision parameters down as the organization needs them. And then you can automate and you build it out. So I'm not saying that anybody should not invest in AI, because I think AI is going to have some wonderful things, but you have to make sure that you understand how to use it correctly. And that's the same as any technology. And that's what we provide as well.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. Before I let you go, I want to have a bit of fun with you now. I always try and bring out a virtual soapbox, because I got a feeling that when you're scrolling down your LinkedIn newsfeed or having a look on Reddit or wherever you hang out, you see a lot of myths and misconceptions about the areas that you work in. So let's see if we can right a few wrongs here, bust those myths. What do people misunderstand most about your industry? Or are there any myths about your job or area of expertise that we can lay to rest?
I think the biggest thing that we can do is get people to become aware of our technology exists. So when people talk about cybersecurity, everyone instantly thinks as again software and the application. So for those more technical, everyone thinks of layer 2 to 7 in the OSI stack. No one's thought about security at layer 1 at the bottom, at their actual fundamental foundations where everything goes through, and that's where we are. And that's where we add that extra layer of defense and depth of defense. And that's what I want people to understand is security can be an illusion, but it can also be real. And if they understand that if they have all of the different parameters in place, and they can go through the entire stacks, you've got a much better chance of actually continue to be operating consistently without any damage coming through, whether it's by accident or whether it's by malicious intent.
And for anybody listening that just wants to find out more information on any of the topics we crammed into a 30-minute conversation today, we did cover a lot there. Where would you like to point everyone if they want to continue this conversation and find out more about the work that you're doing?
2 places. Goldilock.com is our website. So please contact us via there or via my LinkedIn page. But also we work with channel partners only. So we actually have a massive program with working with key distributors and key resellers and integrators. And they are starting to educate people and deploy and obviously sell the products on our behalf. So there's a lot of parts to keep a lookout for. And we have some fabulous PR teams pushing some work out for us as well.
Awesome. Well, I'll add links to everything there. And just listening to you, I think one of the key messages there is that the goal isn't to go back to air-gapped islands everywhere, but just to put deliberate, well-placed fire breaks into sprawling networks so a breach becomes a containable incident, not a company-wide crisis and a huge blast radius there. So thank you so much for shining a light on this. I'd love to throw it back to everyone listening. What are your thoughts? What are your experiences? Please let me know at techtalksnetwork.com as well. But more than anything, just thank you for starting this conversation today. Really appreciate your time.
No, thank you for having us on. And as I said, we just want to defend people and actually make a better difference. So thank you.
I think if today's discussion told us anything, it's that the future of cybersecurity might hinge on a cultural shift as much as a technical one. From permanent access to deliberate policy-driven connection, physical segmentation, right-sized connectivity, and the ability to pull up a firebreak in seconds, these are the things that could be the difference between a minor incident and a business-wide crisis. So as you head back into your own organisation, ask yourself, do you actually need everything connected at the same time? And do you have the control to change that when it matters most? As always, love to hear your perspective, your challenges, and how you're rethinking resilience in this new threat landscape, or a threat landscape that continues to evolve at breakneck speed. As I said earlier, techtalksnetwork.com. You'll find all the links how you can get hold of me. 4,000 different interviews over there as well. Love to hear your feedback on this one. But that's it for today. So thank you for listening as always, and I'll speak with you all again very soon. Bye for now.